trends in language and trends in conversation or words happen because of women.
Welcome to the Progressive Women's Leadership Podcast. Our mission is to advance the women's leadership movement in a way that is empowering, supportive, and bold. My name is Nicole Teon-Regal, and I will be your host. My guest today on the show is Megan Godorov. Megan is a career consultant and speaker dedicated to helping women build careers that last. As a millennial cusper herself, she combines her professional training with her personal experiences to inspire, educate, and mentor women who want to grow and lead themselves and others more effectively in this changing workplace landscape. She offers individualized coaching sessions and small group workshops to empower this process through her company, Megan Godorov Consulting. Megan speaks nationally on topics such as women's leadership, salary negotiation, and preparing for the job search. Her advice has appeared in the Huffington Post college blog, Higher Ed Beyond the University, Nerd Scholar, and Good.co. Welcome, Megan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Nicole. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here and be able to chat about this topic that I'm truly passionate about. So I'm really excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. To get us started, just to make sure that everybody kind of understands the landscape of the multiple generations, we know that the workplace is made up of baby boomers and Gen Xers and millennials. Can you give us a little bit of background on what makes somebody a millennial?
Sure. So millennials typically are born between the early 1980s and 2000s. And so they span a great deal of years there. It's one of those, or I guess generations that we sort of call Generation We or Global Generation or Generation Net. So you may have heard those names more often than Millennial, but I highly doubt that in this age. Really, millennials are the group of individuals that are going to take over the workplace or have already started doing so. And they are the kind that have grown up with Facebook, pre or post. I know that I started with Facebook my junior year of college. And so it was sort of, there's part of us that have that technology in our background, and there's part of us that have sort of always been entrenched in it, but have started to learn about it. So we're very complex. We're global. Most of us were in high school at the time that 9/11 happened. And so we have a different perspective on the world and what that looks like. I say we because I'm a part of the generation. I was, as you had said, Nicole, in your introduction, that, I'm a cusper. I'm sort of in the early years of millennial. And so that makes me slightly different, partly because I can sort of understand the Gen Xers and I can also understand the millennials. And so millennials are very much entrenched in global matters. They really want to make change happen. They want to be a part of something large scale. They want to be a part of something that's really based on their passion. And so I feel as though there's a lot of us that embody a little bit of both Gen X at my age and also just really truly wanting to get what they need right away. There's this immediacy in millennials as well. So those are the general ideas about what millennials or who millennials are in that regard.
Can you talk a little bit more about what they're looking for specifically in the workplace, what their needs and what their wants might be as it relates to the workplace?
Sure. Yeah. This seems to be a little bit more specific in terms of, who they are as workers. I think back to, when I was in college and, career development and thinking about career was just not as important as it is now to the millennials that are currently in college or had recently graduated. And so millennials are really looking for an experience that allows them to grow, feel empowered, want and desire personal development and really expression at work. And so that can provide some challenges, partly because, they're not necessarily patient. They want what they want when they want it. And they always want to be rewarded for a job done, let alone a job well done. And so those are some of the negative, I guess, aspects of some of the positive attributes that they hold. They absorb and they process a lot of information. So at work, they're probably super efficient. They're the ones that can get their job done in 4 hours instead of 8. And then they wonder what they're supposed to do in the meantime. And, they want that speed and efficiency, and they'll make sure that they get it because they'll be asking for more work or because they'll be, talking about what they can or cannot do in that regard. So millennials also really want to challenge tradition and change. And I think this is probably the biggest sticking point for the other generations that are in the workplace, and probably why there's a lot more out there now when people are talking about millennials and what they're going to do to the workplace. And what I mean by challenge, tradition, and change is that they'll always ask, well, what has been done in the past? And what about this? And they'll offer ideas to kind of make things shift and make things change. And that is not always accepted. And millennials don't often know how to not offer ideas. They were born in a college environment and experienced a college environment that encouraged them to speak up, encouraged them to contribute. And now they're asked not to, or in some contexts, maybe not as often as they had in the past. So that's sort of their personality also in the workplace. The other couple of things that I'd like to add there too is that they really appreciate collaboration. And I cannot stress this enough, that they want to have, especially for managers, right? They want to have your input. They want to be able to talk with you about something that's on their mind. They want to be able to think about how they can work together, or how units even across the company might be able to work together. They're always thinking about integration and collaboration and connectedness. I think the last thing I'll share, specifically with what millennials want or need in the workplace, is to contribute, to feel like they actually made a difference. In my experience, I worked in higher ed for a little bit of time before I decided to move on to my business. And, in the college environment, they want to feel like they are supportive of the mission. Even, millennials in nonprofits or working for international NGOs or something like this, they really want to feel like they can buy into what's there and to know that they've created impact in the bottom line or impact on a larger scale. And, I think that can feel like a contradiction at times, depending on what they're hearing in the workplace or what they were promised in an interview or what their expectation was of it. And so they're figuring that out as well.
You talked, one of the things I like that you said, you talked about being supportive of the mission. And when I hear that, it says to me that they also want to be part of probably creating that mission or contributing to that mission. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I completely agree. There's actually an individual that I know, a friend of mine, that's shares with me a lot about her work experience, just because we're pretty close. And she was a product of the program that she's actually trying to encourage or promote or grow. It's a nonprofit. They're involved in higher education, but they're also outside of higher ed. And her main drive for this work is the fact that she knows the value of it for herself. She's been a part of it, and she wants to make sure that she contributes to it in the bottom line. And that mission-based kind of work is inherent in a lot of what I'm seeing with my peers or with people who are younger than me. There's several people that are, let's say, in the financial sector that are leaving. They're like just running away from it because they want to do something that creates purpose, that builds relationships with others, that makes them feel like at the end of the day they're not exhausted because they've just been working 60 hours towards making another business more money, but instead to be helping somebody be healthier because they're a type A personality and they can't seem to move away from the dreaded 60-hour work week. So I'm seeing people branch off and follow that instinct more than I have, over the last 20 years in work, based on the people that I've talked to that have been in work, for the last 20 years as well, the Gen Xers and the baby boomers, for example.
We hear a lot about the millennials maybe staying at home longer than previous generations, and just having a different context around that. Can you talk a little bit about what excelling adulthood versus delaying adolescence means in this context?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought this up, partly because, I'm a perfect example. So I'll put myself out there as Exhibit A. And I think it's, I'll sort of say this later, but I feel as though women sharing stories with each other is really what's going to help us feel better about where we're at in our careers and personal life. So I'm going to put myself out there in this way. So, I graduated from Franklin and Marshall College, and I went home without a job. And I had sent out a zillion cover letters and, really tried to reach out to as many people in my area as I possibly could. And I landed on an opportunity in my hometown, which was wonderful. I spent 2 years there. While I was working, I was also living at home. And then I decided that I was going to go to graduate school. And personal experience had, kind of kept me at my own parents' house. And that was fine. I wanted to save money and go to graduate school and not have a lot of debt because I had already had debt from my undergrad. And during those 3 years of graduate school, I was still at home. And then once I was able to graduate from graduate school, I moved. And I moved up to New England and had spent 5 years, still there now, but spent 5 years working full time and living on my own. And so I spent a good part of my 20s living in my parents' house. Then I spent the latter part of my 20s, now a little bit of my early 30s, living on my own, but with housemates, three other people living in my house. And I had gone through several housemates because, in a transient time of your life, in your late 20s, early 30s, that's what a lot of people are doing. They're hopping in and out of living situations with their parents or with each other or with their partners. And now as I'm trying to develop a business and continuing to move my business forward, I'm going to move back in with my parents. And so it's one of those things where I feel like it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like there's support and there's continuity in career, personal life that sort of is more fluid than what it is before. It's not as linear as what we think. So going back to your question about excelling adulthood versus delayed adolescence, there are parts of my story and many other women that I've talked to, for example, who feel like they're moving forward in adulthood and also are feeling like they're stuck, not necessarily maybe completely in adolescence, but, they're finding ways to be more financially independent and to find love or find partnership and move on in that regard. But others are still, kind of moving in and out of being what others might think of as like, behind schedule. And I think that has a lot to do with the media. I think that has a heck of a lot to do with the economy. And, many millennials graduated in the bubble of 2008. And it really has, we've really spent several years trying to get out of that. I mean, many more than just several, but I think that many millennials are caught in that. And so I know I have many conversations with my peers, my friends, my clients who really don't know how to make sense of that because they can't compare themselves to their parents and they can't really compare themselves to their mid 30s, early 40s, mentors or coworkers because they grew up in a different time. So I think there's a lot of us that are, maybe even moving back in with parents to take care of elderly parents or, getting divorced and trying to live on their own once again, even though they had moved towards, a more stable, quote, stereotypically stable kind of living environment and adulthood. So I think there's I have a student development background and also an adult development background. And I feel like we need, as managers or even as peers or as friends or colleagues who are maybe a little bit older than millennials, to help them understand that, some of these struggles are universal. And some of these struggles may be because of the type of world that we're living in right now, the type of country that we're living in based on all these other factors. So that's sort of where I feel like millennials are when it comes to this excelled adulthood versus delayed adolescence.
And hearing you talk about it, I think about the phrase that we hear about so often about how women can't have it all. And it's almost as if that phrase really resonates with the context that you provided, because it's not the typical, oh, you're married and you've got children and you've got, you work full time. It's a different way of approaching that look. So for you to want to excel in your career, you have to make a sacrifice and say, I'm not that it's a necessarily bad thing to be with your parents, but you're adjusting your life to go to live with your parents because you want to excel in another piece of your life, knowing that eventually that will catch up and you'll be in a different position in your life, but it's kind of just a different way of thinking about that phrase.
Right. And I think that, I'm so glad you brought that up because I had a group of women over to my house several months ago as I was kind of revamping and rebranding my business and really thinking about who I wanted to reach and who my market was. And really, women who are I've studied women at this stage consistently, partly because I am at that stage, but also because there's so many of them around me. And so many of us talk about how we can't have it all, or what should we prioritize first, or what should we put on the back burner, or how can we make multiple of those factors move forward at once. And I think it's such a delicate balance. I mean, but women in, who might be our managers or people who are in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, who are seeing us struggle. I mean, this is the place where you can insert yourself, right? You can say, here's what I struggled with at that time. And that was very similar to what I thought about. Despite the progression that we may have made, there's still some of those things that people still grapple with because it's developmental. It has nothing to do with, what is going on in the economy as much as it has to do with the fact that we're women and we're growing and we're in our 20s and 30s. So I feel as though what you said, having it all, I mean, you have to define what that means to you. Maybe it's not having everything. Maybe it's having these three really important facets and you can let the other four go. And so you're right. You're constantly making shifts and adjustments in what matters to you most.
Right, which is the case for women of all ages and all generations.
Exactly.
So how can the women listening today help millennials create their personal brand?
I love this question, Nicole. This is like my favorite question. And partly because, I've spent a great deal of time not only teaching myself how to develop my professional personal brand, but also how to teach others or teaching others how to do that. And this has been a variety of women. It's not just millennial women. It's women who are in their 40s and 50s who are thinking about, what their experiences look like now that there's more of a digital presence that they have to adhere to. And so for those women who are managers helping millennials, I would say dig in with them. If they're struggling through it and you're not really sure what to do to create a brand, especially something digital, there's so many resources out there. LinkedIn has many fabulous videos, instructional videos that talk about how to create a brand. There's several videos on my YouTube channel, which I can certainly provide a link to for you in the show notes. I think that there's also an opportunity here for some reverse mentoring. And I wanted to sort of highlight that a little bit because the women who are in their 40s and 50s have solid careers under their belts, right? They know what it means to be successful in the workplace. They know what it means to be successful in their field. And they can show you, or you can show them, right? Millennials, you as 40s and 50-year-old managers can show millennials what it takes. What do they need to polish in their own personal brand? It doesn't even have to be digital. It can just be, what am I seeing in the workplace? Are you bringing your phone with you to meetings? Is that not really allowed? Are you working late, outside of the office? Or are you working in the office really late? Are you leaving the office early? Are you not coming in on time, right? These are all facets of your personal brand. And I think that if you feel like that's something that you can provide to the millennial, ask them to help you with something else that you don't know about. And maybe that is the digital brand development. Maybe they've already experienced some of that in the college environment with their career centers, and they know what that looks like. It's a matter of kind of give and take. And I think that this was sort of made really popular in recent years, this reverse mentoring concept in some of those larger scale businesses, because they knew that they were bringing in a huge flux of millennials to work, and they didn't really know how to connect them with their higher level managers. And so I want you to think about ways in which you could maybe provide some feedback to a millennial, or you can ask the millennial to help you with something in particular that you feel like they might know more of. Maybe it's social media. I think that's a huge one too. Like, how do I manage social media? How do I tweet at conferences? How do I Instagram, right? Like, not a lot of people know about that. What is Snapchat? What does that look like? And so I think that can be a way to really build a relationship with somebody. The other thing that I want to say in sort of this mentoring capacity, the Roaring 30s. It's a Kindle book. It's not like an actual book. You have to buy it on Kindle. It's stories told from women in their 30s, and that could be shared either with women that are also in their 30s or women that are in their 20s that are trying to provide perspective. And in that book, it said that women ages 21 to 33 want and value mentorship, but less than 60% report having a mentor. So wouldn't it be great if you could just help them become more professional in their experiences as a professional by offering to take them to coffee and chatting with them about what is going on with them currently in work, and talk to them about, what it means to be successful at the company or what it means to be successful in the industry. That's helping them develop a better brand because you're giving them the information they need to be able to do that. One of my favorite quotes, and I think, Nicole, you also mentioned this too, is that, Booker T. Washington said it. If you want to lift yourself up, lift up someone else. And I think that can just feel so much better, right? It helps you create a better brand as well. If you're known as somebody who's going to help somebody else out and lift other people up and make connections for other people because that's just who you are, you're going to have a better brand too. And that's the model that those millennials will see, that they will then enact their network or activate their network for other women. I just think it's so important. The other piece that I don't know if you had a comment about that, Nicole, or, you wanted to expand.
No, I totally, I agree with you. I'm a big fan of that Booker T. Washington quote. I also like too how you were talking about in the reverse mentoring, how let the millennials help you do something, and it goes back to the point you made earlier about how they want to contribute and they want to be a part of something. So it's not just a one-sided view of the mentoring process.
Right. And a lot of times millennials just need permission to move forward. How many times have they waited in their younger lives, right, to just have permission to say, here, you're great at this. You can go forward and do this. Like, good luck, And other times they've been full steam ahead, on the Acela train going from, Boston to Philly in no time flat. So I feel like there's a real sense of ownership of your own career, and you as a facilitator of their ownership of their own careers, CEO of your own career is sort of something that I hear a lot. It can be really helpful. And I think showing that, your brand may not have been perfect all the time, right? That you're human is also a great development, because they can then be human with other people. Being relatable and connecting is also really helpful. So yeah, I think that's, sort of more about how I feel women listening today can really help millennials create their personal brand. There's a lot of being able to teach them integrity and, in what they're putting out in the world in terms of a digital identity, but really helping them highlight their skills and find the networks and find the connections that they need to continue to put themselves in front of people where they can learn, where they can learn what it takes to be successful in their careers.
Well said. So we know through various studies and just life in general that women and men manage differently. Are there things that women do that may make them more effective at managing millennials versus men?
Yes. For millennials, relationships matter. So I feel as though, because I said before, right, that millennials are excited about collaboration. They really want to feel connected to the people that they work with. They would rather not be sitting in their own little offices doing their work. They'd rather just be in a large room, just running into people and sharing ideas and moving themselves forward and moving the work forward, because they're just kind of bumping into each other in that regard. And women are good at that. Women are great at building relationships. They seek that. It's a proven fact, biologically, that we love relationship building and that we're good at it. Case in point, I have a friend who's a linguist at UMass Amherst, which is just a college, a little bit down the way from where I am. And she was talking to me about uptalk and speech in women and sort of the stereotypes around how women speak. And she said to me at one point that, trends in language and trends in conversation or words happen because of women, because women talk more. And so women shape language more. And I thought, how compelling. And why not think more about that in terms of how they can be supportive to other women, right? Because if they're continuing to talk to women, sharing experiences, sharing stories, which again is another piece of why women can be really great as managers for other women, they share stories and they build relationships around those stories and connection. Going back to the example I shared earlier about the women that I brought together in my house to have just sort of like let's brainstorm about Megan's business and what do you want to hear and what do you want to see as women and what's on your mind in terms of career and your personal life. They loved having that time together. They said that it's rare that they have a space to connect as a group ever with other women on this topic. And I thought, wow, if we are all in silos and the simple thing that we can do to be better managers or to be better employees would be to connect with each other, I think a lot of problems would be solved. And so I really want to give that back to our audience today. It's really about relationships. Take somebody out to coffee, bump into them in the hallway and just talk to them about what's going on outside a staff meeting, right? Outside of actual meetings that are being scheduled. And I know sometimes that can be hard, but I think that there's a real ability to relate and to be honest and to be human and to really humanize that professional experience that won't cross a boundary. And I know that probably some of you are thinking, well, I don't want to be too personal because that could be difficult for, working experiences. But I feel as though there's a way that each of you would bring something to the table that would allow you to be very honest and connected with each other without it crossing a boundary. I think that the other thing too that I want to reinforce here is that women get the demands that are being placed on them in the workplace, especially as they age. So, for example, I'm thinking I'm up for a big promotion, but I'm also married and I'm trying to get pregnant with my husband. And oh my gosh, what is that going to mean for my career? Like it's over, or I'm going to have to take time off. And am I going to have enough time to show my boss that I'm capable and that I can do this work? And there's a lot of pressures that I think come along with growing up as a woman that only really women can understand the nuances of. And so that's another way where I think female managers can be really supportive of millennials, especially millennial women, because they get it. They get the pressures. They understand how they navigated that themselves. They know how their peers or their colleagues navigated it. And those are the ways that they can, again, share the stories and be relatable and build relationships with women that allow them to be, more positive and more ready and supportive of what they're going to encounter next. I think that the other thing too, and I'll say this, which I think is just sort of me as an advocate, more wearing my feminist hat for a second, that women today, to me, seem more eager to change the equation from protecting one piece of the pie to working together to increase the size of the pie. And so anything that I just mentioned, right, relationship building, relating to each other based on the demands of the workplace and demands of you as a woman, really all kind of showcase that we need to be invested in a better future for our daughters, for our nieces, for our grandchildren. And so what female managers can help millennials now to achieve that by modeling that good behavior so that they will do that also as managers.
Well said. Well said. Thank you for that. You hit on a lot of good points. I love the point that you said. You're right. The women who are managing have been through a lot of these things. And so keeping that information to themselves certainly isn't going to help the next generation. So sharing that information, and millennials need to feel comfortable also asking those kinds of questions to see how they can position themselves for the future. So I think you hit on a lot of really good points there.
Yeah. And it's not just on the manager's head. It's not just the manager's responsibility. It's the millennial responsibility too. But the manager can help facilitate the conversation.
Absolutely. The work world for the millennials has been described more as a jungle gym than a ladder. The ladder being what those of us in the Gen X or baby boomers are used to. Can you describe a little bit what that means and how managers might be able to keep good millennials?
Yeah. So lateral accomplishments equal linear accomplishments. And I want everybody that's listening to remember that particular equation, right? Lateral accomplishments equal linear accomplishments. There are many industries that really appreciate this linear trajectory still. And that's fine. You just have to know what industry you're in and know what they value. There are a lot more industries today that are allowing for sort of these lateral jumps that still continue to move your career forward, just as equally as, let's say, a promotion might. So a jungle gym is, you're right. There's sort of like this half circle sort of in the ground that you get to climb and move laterally and move up and then move around and then go back down. And not everybody is just moving up in the world to get ahead in their career. So for example, there's a couple examples of actually students I've worked with or clients I've worked with that have said, I just completely want to jump ship on this career. Like I'm moving forward as a CPA, and I hate it. And even though I've, literally advanced, I've decided now that I'm going to step back and I'm going to create my own business. And that looks to everybody else like I'm taking 10 steps back instead of 10 steps forward. But all of that I've experienced, this individual in particular has said, all that I've experienced in that field has gained me access to these women that I want to work with, to these type A people that I really feel like I want to help. And so now she's climbing a different ladder, but it's her own ladder. And so she gets to experience or experiment with speaking engagements and with blogging and with client services. And all of those things combined, aren't necessarily linear in nature, but they are allowing her to have a better sense of accomplishment and really attached to who she is as an individual, right? It's more about herself and not necessarily about the company or about, the career trajectory that is accounting. So what I mean to say is that success can happen without climbing a ladder. You can switch industries, you can follow your interest at any time. And there's more space in this workplace landscape now to do that. You don't have to stay the course. And I think a lot of people, or at least some millennials, maybe even some of the managers that are listening today, have felt that way, that they were just continuing to move forward because that was what was valued in society. And now society values the entreployee or the permalance kind of society. And I've discovered more and more of these people, that are doing this, jumping ship, so to speak, or testing out different industries. It happens a lot in the communications field because somebody tries graphic design and then they say, no, I want to be a social media manager. And then they say, oh, I want to be a journalist. And then they go and do reporting. And so they're building a really comprehensive career that sort of is large scale communications, but they're not just stepping up from one reporter level to the next reporter level to the next reporter level. And I want to spend just a little bit more time on the entreployee idea, because it's something that I feel really passionate about. And I feel as though many millennials don this hat. And so for managers, it's important to pay attention to this because a lot of the characteristics of who they are embody this term. There's only a couple articles out there about it, and I'll provide those in the show notes for sure. But an entreployee is somebody who demonstrates entrepreneurial characteristics in a more traditional workplace. And so these folks might be having side gigs or doing side hustles, so to speak. I have a friend who works for a local photographer, but she also does graphic design work on the side and builds websites and just got a new client and was super excited about that. Just like really felt like there was something beyond the 9-to-5 grind that could help her feel like she could move her career forward, do the little jungle gym movement, but feel really good about herself and still about the work that she does 9 to 5. I have another friend who works in finance at a local college, and she's also a fitness instructor. And she loves doing that work because it's something so different than what she's currently doing. But, many people just recently have said, hey, you should start your own business with this. Like, you're a great instructor. And so again, that provides them, especially millennials, with more growth and development. And so for managers who want to keep millennials, give them the space to explore the things that get them excited. Learn about what they are doing that gets them excited. They could be doing this job 9 to 5, but they could have a zillion other interests. And knowing what those are and how they might be able to incorporate those skills in the work that they're doing currently will keep them, will help them stay longer. It happened to me with my work at Mount Holyoke College. I loved community development. I loved leadership development. And so I just threw myself right into the community. And those skills and those connections that I made paid off for the institution. I was able to connect our employer relations folks back to some local employers. I was able to bring leaders in to talk to our students and to provide them with some more development opportunities. So you never know what will happen. And so I think that there's growth and development that can be had with this new idea of the jungle gym. And I think managers can harness that by saying, okay, yeah, maybe you're not going to become the next director, but you're going to be able to provide us some value at this level because I've allowed you to jump into other things that interest you.
Right, as opposed to stifling that because they work 80 hours a week or something like that. Give them an opportunity to explore it because the payoff can benefit both sides, basically.
Exactly. Challenging them to do that and involving them in, the lifeline of the organization in a way that sort of makes sense to them. Very personalized, which I think is another aspect of millennials. I think that can be really powerful.
Right. I like it. Kind of further to that concept, there's a phenomena called the fear of missing out, or FOMO, I believe it's called, where it's largely fueled by social media. So you see your friends at a party where you're not there, or you see something else going on that you're not part of. How does that affect millennials, and what can managers do to change or kind of redirect that concept as it relates to them in the workplace?
Yeah. So a lot of times I've found that managers who talk to me about this issue, clients or organizations that sort of come to me and say, there's this woman or this person that is super focused on her work. Like, she loves the work that she's doing. She talks about it all the time. But I know that she's posting on social media, or whatever it might be during the day. And I think that in the workplace, have a social media policy, instituted at your company or within your department or whatever makes sense for you as a manager. I think the other part of this that sort of is deeper than just, the policy, so to speak, is to really say, like, okay, let's embrace this. In your weekly supervisory conversations, maybe talk about what they are involved in or what's pulling them away from work, what they're intrigued in, and chat with them about what they discovered, because maybe it's a fear of missing out on something across, the company. Like, wow, that initiative sounds so cool. I really want to be a part of that, but I don't have time for that in my current work. Helping them rebalance that so that there's not that fear of missing out. Instead, there's this idea that you're supportive of them indulging themselves in something else. You really then get to test their interest and open up conversation in the future for things that may matter to you in the end, right? That they might be able to get intelligence from another area of the company that could then inform your work, and you could be better at doing that. Encouraging discussions on topics that are interesting to them. That they're following on social media some of these other, I don't know, let's say you're in a financial company, but they're really involved in news that's happening locally. Well, maybe you can talk to them about what's going on locally that's taking them away from their work. And that allows you to maybe not necessarily say, okay, well, you can go do something related to that, but instead just, learn more about them, and they won't feel like they're missing out on it because they get to process it, or they know then that you're paying attention. And I think that can also just be a way to manage behavior a little bit more. Let's see. I think that the hardest thing here, at least for me in my experience, I'll share this again, is that in my work, I want to be a part of the strategy. I want to know what's going on a strategic level. And not every millennial is like that. I'll say that obviously with with being very honest about it, but I feel as though many more that I've talked to really do want that chance to have input. They want to be able to share an idea. They want to be able to know what's going on a large scale. It goes back to mission. I want to be a part of an organization that has mission and purpose. And I think that can feel very much like, well, I should be a part of that conversation because I have things to contribute, like that's what they say to themselves. But positionally, you as a manager may think, well, they don't really have any business being a part of that meeting, or they don't have any business, thinking about that because that's not their role. They don't see themselves just in their role. They see themselves beyond that too. So I think having conversations about that, and maybe it is about, okay, well, what does your role really require? Maybe you have to have that conversation with them once again. I know that human resources can do an exercise with any employee really that allows them to assess their job. And it's at Mount Holyoke, it was called a job analysis. We did it at some point in time when we were in transition at the office. And it really helped me to say, wow, I've outgrown these different areas, or I've also added this to my workload, or wow, this shouldn't belong to my position at all. And so I think that can also help with FOMO a little bit, because it's a self-reflection exercise, a self-assessment exercise. And with millennials being so outward about what they're seeking and getting information, they kind of forget to look back inward. And you as a manager can help them do that.
Well said. I like that. And you're right. They'll be looking for something if they feel that they have outgrown what they're doing. And so speaking as a manager myself, I've always, if they're good people, I want to keep them here, even if it means them, say, transitioning into another position. Mm-hmm. I'd rather keep them within the company than have them go elsewhere.
Exactly.
So, right. So we hear a lot about the concept of leaning in, made popular by Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. What does that concept mean to millennials?
So I think for them, and even to me, and I've talked to a lot of women about this, it means that you follow your interests, that you go for it, that you ask questions, that you don't settle, that you show your strengths, and that you learn about them even if you don't already know them, that you're actively finding mentors in your field, that you encourage other people to do the same, right? That you lift people up, that you empower them to ask. I have a friend who is definitely leaning in, but she doesn't know that she's doing it. She has this new job. She's a director. And she said, I've hesitated to say I'm a director to people because I'm afraid that they're going to, to say that, oh, well, fancy position. And and it's sort of like, you're almost thinking about the imposter syndrome there a little bit. But I encouraged her. I said, look, you are doing it. Look at all this that she has somebody who's in another director role on campus that is sort of saying to her oh, well, you're doing all these great things, and kind of looking at it as a negative. And I said to her, well, you should flaunt the fact that you're doing all this, track all your accomplishments. You are leaning in, you're putting yourself out there and acknowledging that. And I think that some millennials will just do and not really acknowledge it. And others will just put themselves in and continue to do that and forget that at the end of the day, they've grown in so many different capacities. I think that at times, leaning in can feel inaccessible. And I think that this was one of the main critiques of, Cheryl's book was that, okay, well, she's a wealthy white woman, working has lots of access because of her Harvard education. And so how else can other women do that? And I think that as a manager, we want to be able to, or you would want to be able to show millennials what leaning in means to you and to the company and to the profession that you're in, the industry that you're in, because it may not mean all of those things. To me, it may mean that I raise my hand every meeting and give feedback or input on an idea when maybe that's not actually what leaning in should mean, in the context. Maybe the leaning in is volunteering to do something in that meeting instead of just giving a piece of advice. What is going to be looked at as the leadership quality of that organization or of the industry? And that's how you're going to lean in more effectively. So I think that managers can do that by giving millennials ways to test out leaning in, especially if they're not used to it or if they're new to work in general. I'm thinking of those 22-year-olds, 23-year-olds, who really kind of need a little bit of extra guidance. Give them a larger project. Let them sit in on a planning group. Let them run a program, and not give them to them and just kind of run off with it, but be there, available to them. And I think that, I think Cheryl was the most effective, in my opinion, in her book, because she shared the nuances of her experience in the most contentious times of her career and personal life. And going back to what I said earlier, in our conversation, that I really do feel like that you need to share your stories, and leaning in means being honest, and leaning in means being vulnerable, not only with yourself, but with the women around you, and sometimes with your managers. And I think managers, you can also be vulnerable sometimes with your employees or your supervisees. And that can sort of show people how leaning in is not just always career-based, but it can be personal, and that can lend itself well to career leaning in.
Well said. Right. There's different approaches to every aspect of that. And I like the idea you're saying, when they're younger, start with different things, whether it's a project or, one of the big things about that, making sure they have a seat at the table, doing things that are small gestures, but that can help move them forward and make them feel comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she's now my boss, but at the time she was a mentor of mine. And I told her that I was starting my business. This was like 4 years ago. And she said, well, I have a lot of extra resumes that I can't always handle. May I send them over to you? Like, I'll pay you. Just let me know what your rate is and we'll go from there. And, over time, she continued to involve me in her business. And those little things, right, allowed me to lean in. It showed me that this person who was very well known in the field, who has developed a fabulous business, is giving me the chance to be a part of something. And those little things can make a huge difference in somebody's confidence. It can make a huge difference in millennials' ability to lean in. And it shows you, again, as somebody who's willing to support that. So yeah, I agree. The little things count.
So during part of the preparation for this podcast, we talked about the Pew Research Millennial Quiz. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh, yeah. So this is a great tool. And, when Nicole and I were chatting just about this topic in general, it's clear that we're both very passionate about this. So I said to her that I read this book by Lindsay Pollack. It was called Becoming the Boss. And it's really a toolkit for millennials to be better leaders. And it's also a really helpful book, I think, for managers, because it kind of gives you a sense for what the millennials are really seeking and what they might need to develop. And so it could be something that you both could share as a read, together, if that's something that works into your schedules. But in the book, there's this quiz that she highlights from the Pew Research Center. And it's really just a kind of a fun little thing to say, how millennial are you? So when you're thinking about who a millennial is, and maybe how you are as a Gen Xer or a baby boomer, really what characteristics do you exhibit that are typically millennial? And so I shared this with Nicole, and she took it. And then I also took it again because I couldn't remember what my score was the last time I took it. But it really tells you how millennial you are. And so I'm 93% millennial, which is kind of accurate considering that I'm a cusper, right? That I'm not exactly in the trenches of being a millennial, but that I may have I might understand because of my work or because of, my ability to teach millennials how to be successful leaders, that I may not be completely millennial. And then Nicole, you want to share what you got?
Sure. So I got an 86, which I was surprised because I am far from being a millennial. I'm well entrenched in the Gen X generation. But in just reading the questions, and as Megan said, it's a very simple quiz. Reading over the questions, it just gets you thinking, okay, maybe I'm not so different than they are. And certainly my score indicates that maybe I'm not so different than they are. But it gives you that nice perspective. And the fact that there are overlapping themes among all generations, that it's not all cut and dry.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like the media has done such a fabulous job, I'm sort of being coy there, of really portraying millennials in a very negative light. And so that is causing this polarization, I think, among generations as well right now. I mean, you think of the Gen Xers who are like, I've been spending all this time building my career up, and this millennial is just going to come right in and take it away from me, and then the baby boomers saying, well, we're really distant from them, and how are we going to manage them? Oh my goodness, I mean, think about yourself at that age. Maybe you exhibited a lot of the same characteristics. Think about what the media was talking about when the baby boomers were coming into, the workplace. Was there a lot being said about them at that time? Probably not. We probably didn't have as much media outlets in general. So I feel as though this quiz really helps to sort of level the playing field a little bit. There's a great survey from Deloitte. It's 2014 Deloitte Millennial Survey. And they give a lot of information about who millennials really are. And I think that a lot of who you were at that age too, in your late 20s or mid 20s and early 30s, are similar to what the millennials are facing. We're just in a different context, different economy, different workplace, landscape, environment. And so I'm just glad that we both took it, and that we can just share at least our scores, because I think you'll be pleasantly surprised what really makes a millennial and how that psychology can really affect how you build relationships with each other among generations.
I agree. So lastly, as a millennial yourself, what's the best piece of advice you can give to women listening today?
Yeah, it's funny because I wrote down like 3 different thoughts. Of course, being in true form, like I can't just give you one thing. Because, I am a millennial and I have lots of ideas. But secondly, I think that, I said it many times during this call and during this chat, I really want you to be real with yourself and with them. Millennials sincerely appreciate transparency. Actually, they crave it. They want to give ideas. They want to be a part of the bigger picture because they want to know what's going on. And so I think holistically, if you can clue them into what's going on, either in your own mind as a woman, or just as a manager that has access to information about the company and direction it's going, or, the strategic plan of your department, whatever that might be, they want that because they want to be part of change. They want to anticipate a flexible workspace. They want to have control over what they're doing. And they're no longer in it for the man. They're in it for themselves and for the organization that they believe in. And they want to be able to contribute in a positive way. So don't dismiss their characteristics, understand who they are and understand who you are in the context of what they're bringing to the table so that you can have a great dialogue and really, not fit them in that millennial box at first, but help to discover them as an individual, and then to put on to some of their typical behaviors, right? The embodiment of the millennial. I think that if you can show support and investment in your fellow womankind, then we'll all be better off in the end, millennial or not, right? Millennials now are going to be the ones that are going to support Generation Z. I mean, believe it or not, the first years of Generation Z are now in college. And so they're going to be slowly but surely, or quickly, probably more than we think, coming into the workplace and changing it up as well. So, thinking about that, always feeling malleable and able to sort of get to know the person and understand the context in which you're working, that's going to be the best thing for everybody.
Well, Megan, this has been wonderful. I want to thank you very much for your time, for sharing your wisdom, and for helping to advance the women's leadership movement. On behalf of Progressive Women's Leadership, I'm signing off. I hope that everyone has a great day.
Thank you very much, Nicole.
Thanks, Megan. Thank you for listening to our podcast and helping us to advance the women's leadership movement. For more engaging content like this, please go to progressivewomensleadership.com. Follow us on social media, including Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Have a topic you would like us to cover? Connect with us, as we love hearing from our listeners.